Warning, this video will contain spoilers for the Dark Aether Storyline, and events that were revealed to us later on in the story will be inserted where they actually happen, so that the plot is more easily digestible. This, however, does ruin certain twists in the story, so if you would like to experience those twists for yourself, as intended by the developers, now is your final warning to pause the video and go play Black Ops Cold War Zombies. Everyone on the same page? Good, let's get started. To begin the Dark Aether storyline with a relevant understanding of some of its characters and the setting of the Dark Aether itself, it is helpful to have a brief understanding of the ending of the Aether storyline. We won't spend long on this, but it is important to start here. I've already posted a 2-hour-long story video last year on the entire Aether story, linked in this video's description. The Dark Aether story follows directly on from those events. In a prior world, the multiverse and all of the worlds inside of it were trapped in suffering. Two gods of chaos and order, the Shadow Man and Monty, and their subsequent factions, the Apothecans and Keepers, fought eternally, forever dooming the world in a time loop where reality was continually destroyed. Until one fateful loop, events changed, and Ultimus and Primus were able to end this cycle of torment through tremendous sacrifice. They sacrificed their own lives and trapped the entirety of the doomed multiverse full of monsters around them in the Dark Aether forevermore. Reality collapsed. Everything that spewed forth from the Aether was banished to where they belonged. Victis helped in their final moments before fading away into the Dark Aether, unaware that they would be cast down, leading them to feel betrayed by Ultimus Richtofen, who instructed them telepathically via Samuel Stullinger's ethereal link with him. The Apothecans and Keepers rejoiced before being fractured throughout the Dark Aether, leading to similar but different demented beings emerging from their dust. With this brave action and the paradox resolved, thanks to the Agarthan device, a new linear world free of corruption was created. Only 2 innocent children would survive this apocalyptic scenario, Samantha Maxis and Eddie Richtofen, both of whom had previously resided in Monty's house in the not-so-perfect Agartha that's now no more. Samantha's soul was plucked from Ultimus Richtofen's body post-moon. Not much is known about Eddie's early life or how he grew up compared to the other versions of Richtofen. All that is known is that he resided in Dimension 2210. At some point while he was a child, Eddie was visited by a grown-up counterpart of himself from Dimension 63, Primus Richtofen, who killed him and acquired his soul with the summoning key, as part of his plan to secure a better tomorrow, and was later transported to the house to join Samantha. The two became friends and would spend much of their time playing with toys gifted to them by Monty. Samantha and Eddie's souls were thought to be purified by Monty, and thanks to the sacrifice of our heroes, these children were able to walk together into the new world and begin new lives, holding hands, free of the cycle forever. Element 115, the Summoning Key, Primus and Ultimus, the Apothecans and the Keepers, and no more. In my explanation of the Aetherverse, I included elements from the campaigns and world events due to them being relevant to the world building, with Black Ops 2 and Black Ops Cold War's campaigns both having multiple choices and endings. It's important to understand that all but one scenario took place in the prior multiverse, with an infinite amount of possibilities in each universe. The campaign events do happen in this new universe. Now that I have introduced the premise of the storyline and the main 2 characters, the only characters from the old storyline, let's jump into the Dark Aether story. Our story begins in the midst of World War II, by late 1943, with Germany having endured her first major surrender at Stalingrad that February. It was realized that more extreme methods may be needed in order to finally win the war for the Reich. As a result, Kurt Diebner, president of the German Uranverein, a nuclear science organization, was ordered to form a new research project intended to produce atomic weaponry. He snapped up the best and brightest in particle physics, and one in particular, a Dr. Ulrich Vogel, was chosen to lead this new research initiative named Projekt Endstation. Sent to a wooded remote facility in Morisco, Germany-occupied Poland, Vogel and the other scientists working under his command were given access to an experimental cyclotron, a particle accelerator, with the intention of using this device to produce this new nuclear technology. By March 1944, 11 tests had ran, and all of them had had yielded little. However, the 12th test would change the trajectory of mankind forever. As the process ran through, the machinery surged and became unresponsive, with Dr. Kurtz being unable to shut the machine down.
This is Ulrich Vogel, Director of Projekt Endstation. 7th of March, 1944, 10:03 p.m. Commencing cyclotron test run number 12.
Looks like we are getting the collisions we expected and, some interesting patterns are starting to...
What was that?
I do not know. Gauges are redlining. We have to shut down.
My God! What is happening to the air around the collider?
You men! Back away from that!
Cut the power!
I'm trying! Controls are not responding!
The two doctors were forced to watch the ensuing chaos within the cyclotron chamber. A strange anomaly manifested within the room, and all the men within were suddenly necrotized by the radiation from the rift, becoming undead. After the room was cleared and the undead specimens were contained, Vogel realized that somehow they had managed to breach the veil between this dimension and another. At this moment, artifacts plundered from sites across the world by SS Division Die Wahrheit began to activate, reconnecting with the Dark Aether, and we will return to this at the end of this video, as this is the premise for Vanguard Zombies' storyline that is set before the events of Cold War Zombies in and around World War II. After taking basic measurements inside the other dimension and realizing that time passed at a different rate, Vogel immediately informs the Uranverein, who responded not with disappointment at the failure of the nuclear project, but with great interest in this new discovery. As the war progressed and Germany's fate looked more and more dire, even Hitler himself expressed a desire to harness this new dimension, specifically with Operation Boulderer. With it appearing almost certain that Germany would lose the war after the loss of Normandy, a band of top SS soldiers under the command of SS Gruppenführer Muller were assembled and sent to Projekt Endstation to be sent into the Dark Aether, where they would lie in wait to be unleashed on the world at some point in the future and re-establish the Reich. This operation was christened Operation Boulderer by Reich High Command, referencing the Norse god who rose from the dead, and was approved on December 14th, 1944. Vogel was tasked to weaponize all their findings and continue to work on his idea of an army of soldiers who could rise up after being killed. A wonder weapon was also created from an Exo-Element 1 collector called the Decompressive Isotopic Estrangement Machine, or DIE for short. Exo-Element 1, also known as Aetherium, is the element from the Dark Aether that's properties are extremely valuable for technological use as well as weaponry, but it's also equally dangerous, infecting and harming those with too much exposure, as well as terraforming areas where there are large Aetherium deposits. It is what those that inhabit the Dark Aether breathe, and they do not have to breathe in oxygen, allowing inhabitants to theoretically survive anywhere within the Dark Aether, where oxygen would normally be required in the regular world, like space. As Task Force Boulderer arrived on site, all of the scientists at Endstation fled the site, except for Ulrich Vogel, who voluntarily stayed behind to take vital readings after the team passed through, as having the cyclotron produce a stable gateway would involve overloading the power couplings and prevent the cyclotron from being able to be disabled. Though he accepted his duty, Vogel couldn't, in good consciousness, leave his daughter an orphan, and so he asked Kurtz to become Angelica, Hannibel's guardian.
This is Ulrich Vogel, Director of Projekt Endstation.
Dr. Vogel? Sorry. I did not know you were recording.
Why are you here, Dr. Kurtz? Did you not read my final orders?
Ja, Herr Doktor. That is what I wish to speak about. This last part. About your daughter.
I know it is asking a lot, Kurtz. And I know you and I have not always seen eye to eye. But I trust no one more than you to look after Angelica when I am gone.
I am honored, sir. But this may not be necessary. I beg you, do not evacuate the facility before launching the operation. With the staff here, there's a chance we can stabilize the collider and safely...
Kurtz, stop. You showed me yourself how Operation Boulder will surely overload the power couplings. But calling it off would doom the Reich. This, my friend, is the only path forward. Take her. Teach her. Be there, both of you. When Operation Balder bears fruit, finish my work. Tell Angelica her father loved her.
Within the next 2 weeks, on February 3rd, 1945, the Soviets arrived in Moscow and found Endstation. After entering the facility and being overrun, NKVD Colonel Pavel Lazarev was sent to the site in order to figure out exactly what happened. Understanding that the machine had somehow produced the undead, he found a young tank mechanic, Sergeant Kazimir Zykov, and volunteered him to be sealed into the facility and shut the machine down. Interestingly, there was no sign of Vogel. After trying everything, Zykov, desperate and thinking of his family, realized he would have to sacrifice himself to prevent the power from ever being used by the outside world, the East and the West, as it would lead to the world's inevitable destruction. He flung himself into the anomaly and closed it from the inside, succeeding in his mission, but trapping himself in a strange and unforgiving world, the place below creation known as the Dark Aether. Film reels were recorded about Projekt Endstation and were sent to the Soviet archives and remained hidden for almost 40 years. On February 21st, Kurtz and Angelica were captured by the Red Army when Lazarev found Kurtz and the young Angelica hiding with him, believing she is Kurtz's daughter. Shortly after this, Lazarev blackmailed Kurtz by threatening to kill Angelica, forcing him to give up the locations of the other Endstation scientists. Kurtz agreed but were forced to move to Russia under new names and work for Lazarev. Kurtz is given the name Ivan Valentin, and Angelica is given Alexandra Valentina. In Russian, female surnames often add an A to the end.
This is Colonel Pavel Lazarev interrogating prisoner Lucas Kurtz. Why did you and so many others desert the facility?
We were ordered to evacuate. We did our duty to the fatherland. That is all you will get out of me.
I will have that little girl we found hiding with you shot.
No! Wait. I will tell you where the rest of the Endstation staff are hiding.
You come back to Mother Russia and continue your work. For me. She will receive a proper Bolshevik education and become a productive member of society.
At around the age of 5, Valentina heard a voice talking to her, claiming to be her father. At first, she doubted this, but then he referred to her by her true name, convincing her that he really was Ulrich Vogel. Whilst Kurtz tried to raise her as a supportive father, he prevented her from an interest in the sciences in order to protect her from following the same path as her real father. All the while, the voice she heard in her head taught her science, allowing her to rapidly become a prodigy, and at the age of 16 be accepted into Moscow's Institute of Physics and Technology. When Kurtz found this letter, he forbade Valentina from entering. However, in response, she poisoned her father's oldest friend, likely under the influence of the voice of Vogel.
Alexandra, is it time for tea already?
Yes, uncle. Be careful. It is quite hot.
Tea can never be too hot. Alexandra, can I have a moment, please? About our discussion yesterday, I only wish to protect you from the mistakes we made.
I understand, Uncle Lucas. But I do not agree. My father was a brilliant man, and you were a pathetic worm working in his shadow. How dare you denounce his work? How dare you sit there and feed me lies?
Careful, Alexandra. Your father...
I will go to university, Uncle. You will not stop me. Father is disappointed you lost your way. You abandoned Operation Boulder.
The tea... What have... done... Alexandra!
She would go on to graduate top of her class in 1960. A decade later, in 1970, she would be recruited into the KGB and at some point later was transferred to Spetsgruppe Omega. Omega Group was formed on August 30th, 1975 by KGB chairman Yuri Andropov to identify, study, and weaponize psychotronic phenomena ranging from biocommunications and bioenergetics. Members of the organization were comprised of specialists from Spetsgruppe Alpha and were tasked with conducting special military-based operations, though a select amount of key personnel derived from previous experiences in other experimental research programs were tasked with investigating possible weapon applications from any exoscientific phenomena discovered. Omega Group never managed to find a scientific explanation for psychotronic abilities, but still conscripted a handful of Russian citizens with genuine talents and turned them into intelligence assets. Their gifts, however, were impossible to reproduce, and all of the assets were either killed in action or suffered psychological breakdowns. In nearby West Germany, Samantha Maxis, raised in an orphanage, was accepted into Heidelberg University, where she obtained a bachelor's degree in applied mathematics with a minor in linguistics. A year later, she was recruited into the BND, the West German Intelligence Service. On October 18th, 1978, the CIA formed a joint task force with MI6 in order to find and kill Mason, Hudson, and Weaver in what they dubbed Operation Charybdis, as they deemed them a threat to national security. The kill order, however, was eventually discontinued and the trio were spared. They continued their work with the CIA. By 1979, Samantha Maxis was placed on assignment in Iran and was caught up in the revolution, as the Shah was overthrown. As the CIA and Western intelligence agencies worked together to ensure the Shah's safe extraction to the United States, many diplomats and Western civilians were being left behind. Going directly against the orders of his superiors, CIA operative Grigori Weaver ordered for her to be extracted out of the country, off the books, marking the beginnings of a strong bond forming between the two spies. Whilst he still maintains and often wears an eye patch to cover his wound after his eye was gouged out by Colonel Lev Kravchenko. At a later point, Sam would give Weaver intel on a special target of particular interest. After believing he had killed the target, Weaver lit the house on fire to cover his tracks, only at that point realizing the target's son, Samuel, and his wife were also inside. Samantha was waiting for a phone call from Weaver from 10 to 12 o'clock, until she heard about an explosion on TV, distressing her to the point of sleeplessness. At 3 AM, Weaver arrived at Samantha's apartment, bloodied and wounded, and wept at what he had done. While crying, Weaver mumbled about covering his tracks after a hit and how sorry he was. He told Samantha that the boy was supposed to be staying with his mother, but in reality was inside the house as it burned to the ground, only to later find out that both the mother and son were inside. Weaver and Samantha Maxis would forever be traumatized with guilt. Samantha would later state that she believes that these events would later come back to haunt them. Omega Group was also involved in the assassination attempts of US President Ronald Reagan in March 1981 and Pope John Paul II in May 1981, as well as the assassination of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat in October 1981. However, as a result of little funding from Andropov, none of Omega Group's initial projects were able to advance past their research phase. Due to this, the CIA would write off Omega Group in 1981, believing that their projects were abandoned. Consequently, all of the assets involved with Omega Group's psychotronic operations were ultimately liquidated following the death of General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev in November 1982. On March 23, 1983, Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, which, if implemented, could have posed a mortal threat to the Soviet Union. 2 days later, the new KGB chairman, Viktor Chebrikov, appointed Colonel Lev Kravchenko as head of the failing Omega Group in an attempt to quickly and quietly end his career after the embarrassment at the Lubyanka building. Kravchenko followed suit, unaware of their nefarious agenda, under the pretense to revitalize and restore Omega Group to full readiness in order to offset the threat posed by the SDI. The very next day, Kravchenko ordered the unit's research and development team to scour NKVD and KGB archives, tasking them to find something useful enough to give Omega Group a new purpose to work for, or else he would terminate the organization and reassign its members. He appointed appointed Gorev his protege and the son he never had as his right-hand man, and placed the impressively intelligent Alexandra Valentina as the head of Psychotronics. Shortly after this, on July 15th, she presented him with two 1945 Endstation tapes, which she had retrieved from the KGB archives after 4 months of digging. In reality, Valentina was aware of the films for nearly a decade, but chose not to reveal them until the time was right. Seeing the tape, Kravchenko ordered Operacja Roboyshtik, also known as Operation Undertaker in English, and Dr. Valentina is sent to Project Endstation alongside Dr. William Peck, a former Department of Defense researcher with an IQ of 179, who was identified as a CIA mole as an ideal candidate for defection. Unbeknownst to Kravchenko, Gorev, and Peck, Valentina plans to use this to free her father. Trebrikov authorized Omega Group to weaponize the findings of Project Endstation and harness the power of the cyclotron and the Dark Aether. The Endstation facility in Moscow was secured by Omega Group in late August 1983, and after 2 months of study, the cyclotron and the other experimental devices were restored to operational condition by late October. The reactivation of the cyclotron took place on November 1st, 1983, and was overseen by Valentina and Peck. Restarting the cyclotron with an ease that Peck finds somewhat alarming, Valentina was proven correct about Operation Undertaker, and outbreak zones began to occur across the globe. Seeing this, on October 3rd, the Associate Deputy Director of the CIA Department of Science and Technology rapidly drafts a proposal for the cabinet of President Reagan for a new office within the DS&T, with NATO representation specifically for the handling of these outbreaks, known as the Office of Requiem. This director is none other than Eddie Richtofen, who would personally choose Grigori Weaver as the special officer for this office, as well as approving Elizabeth Gray, Oscar Strauss, and Mackenzie Carver for Requiem senior staff.
Die Maschine.
What have you done?
Did you get the package?
We've lost 2 teams since you went dark. Old war footage is the last thing on my mind right now.
Watch it. Watch the tape. Then tell me I'm wrong.
On the basis of intel sent in by Samantha Maxis, Requiem authorized Operation Cerberus. Weaver orders the strike team to investigate the site of Project Endstation in Moscow, Poland on November 13th, 1983. It was here they began to piece together the mystery of the outbreaks happening across the globe. Omega Group had entered this facility and reactivated the cyclotron after all these years, while Requiem were unaware of the motivations at the time. Dr. Valentina had used Omega Group by giving the files on Endstation. She planned to release her father, and according to the steps that she had been given, the first step was restarting this machine. Upon infiltration of the bunker, Strike Team explored the facility and found a Dark Aether computer, able to send and receive communications with people trapped inside the Dark Aether. The computer, unbeknownst to Requiem, had been designed by Kazimir Zykov while inside the Dark Aether, and was a key part in his plan to get someone to release him back to our world. After activating the computer for the first time, Strike Team were contacted by Zykov. He rewarded them for their efforts, and they continued trying to shut down the cyclotron. Once they discovered Dr. Vogel's computer and found his hidden password in his journal, they activated Der Veschler, a machine capable of restoring brain function to an undead specimen. After trapping the Megaton inside, his ability to think was somewhat restored, but his body remained that of a monster. Once they managed to calm him down, they learned from him who he was. His name was Orlov, and he had been forced by Valentina and Omega Group to reactivate the cyclotron alongside another man named Medvedev. While Orlov was unsure of this action, Medvedev was excited at the opportunity to advance Soviet supremacy, even at the cost of his own life. As they completed their orders, both men were changed. Orlov split internally over his loyalty to his country, but fear of the consequences of their action became Megaton, a zombie who was literally split apart. It seems like the Dark Aether was able to replicate multiple versions of it, as it's able to do with all other entities. Medvedev, more confident, became Mayak, a more powerful Megaton overlord creature who could not split and was trapped inside the Dark Aether. With Orlov's help, Strike Team disabled the cyclotron and closed the dimensional anomaly. When the Strike Team escaped the facility, thanks to the helicopter pilot Raptor 1, Orlov sacrificed his life to arm and detonate the nuclear bomb still left over from the atomic experiments in the lab, ensuring the destruction of Project Endstation, the cyclotron, and Der Veshla for good.
Good work, Strike Team. We've closed the breach. But I got a feeling Omega Group is just getting started.
With the resounding success of Operation Undertaker, a new operation called Operatia Inversia, or Operation Inversion in English, was approved by Omega Group on November 9th and would be led by Valentina. The goal of the operation was to weaponize Aetherium and anything they could find within the Dark Aether to win the Cold War. Controlling the bridges between their world and the Dark Aether would allow them to harness and weaponize to heights the world had never seen before. An Aetherium Arms Race would begin ensuing between East and West, and thanks to Operation Undertaker, the dimensional veil between this world and the Dark Aether was weakened significantly enough to enable further experimentation with the other dimension, giving Omega a massive lead so far in the Arms Race. Locating an area of particular dimensional fertility in the province Quang Chi, Vietnam, the USSR at Omega's behest immediately contacted and agreed upon the site with the communist Vietnamese government, the former American Firebase Ripcord. The construction of a facility here began on November 11th and was completed a few months later on February 10th, 1985. This new facility was to be referred to as Outpost 25 and would be overseen by Peck. In the coming months, Omega would rapidly increase their understanding of Aetherium thanks to the experiments occurring here. The most significant was a stabilized anomaly contained within a portal chamber. Though not considered a true gateway, it marks the first portal controlled by humans on record since Project Endstation. At the moment, he knew he was successful. Peck goaded his assistant, Dr. Kulkley, and believed he had surpassed even Dr. Vogel's work.
Test number 32. Dr. Kulkley, you may proceed. Activating resonator. Beginning magnetic amplification. Dimensional barrier identified. Beginning particle distortion.
Barrier membrane integrity at 50%.
Amplification is still approaching the limits prematurely.
Increasing voltage output from Aetherium crystal. It's working. Membrane integrity at 40%.
Amplification has reached maximum safety parameters.
Let it ride, Dimitri. Let it ride. Increasing voltage output.
Amplification exceeding safety parameters. They're shutting it down.
You touch that button, I'll have you gutted like a fish and fed to your comrades in Solyanka soup. Membrane integrity down to 10%.
You Mudak! You get us killed.
Great. Adjusting distortion frequency to pattern echo
4. My God.
Eat your heart out, Dr. Vogel. We'll see who history remembers.
Unfortunately, this abusive relationship between Peck and his assistant would only worsen as time progressed. Omega began enlisting soldiers to be sent into the Dark Aether, many of whom were past criminals or devout patriots they could exploit. As Omega's Aethernauts returned from the other dimension with their Aetherium crystals, and often without their sanity, Kulkley set to work trying to make a new Aetherium weapon, the K-84, modeled after the classic Russian Kalashnikov family of rifles. rifles. Peck would not only insult Coldclay for this, but would also steal the design for himself. So yeah, Omega were hard at work in extracting crystals from the Dark Aether to use for technology and weaponry, allowing massive strides in science and technology, giving them a massive one-up against Requiem at this current moment in time. Meanwhile, in neighboring Laos, an Omega Group captain, Sergei Ravanov, was sent in alongside Colonel Lev Kravchenko to investigate a small dimensional breach that had occurred there, which we see take place in Apocalypse Onslaught. In his official report, he claims that Omega Group's asset in the area was dead when they arrived on the scene. In his personal diary, however, he told a very different story. After arriving on site, they found the Laotian contact, but he was not only alive, but had fended off the outbreak. Kravchenko ordered the man to be restrained and informed Ravanov that Valentina had an experiment for them to carry out. They then proceeded to sample the brain fluids of the dead infected and eject them into the contact's head. He died screaming, then kept screaming. After this event, Ravanov began having significant doubts about Omega Group. He was a Soviet through and through, but this was not his Russia. Valentina, amidst these cruel experiments, met with Dr. Coldclay under Peck's nose. Recognizing the hatred he held for his superior, Valentina realized that Coldclay could be an asset in furthering her own plans. Coldclay sourced her the schematics for technology that would allow her to measure the dimensional stability at any place of her choosing.
Is this everything? Surely there is more.
I assure you, Dr. Valentina, this is everything.
Research on membrane permutations? What about the particle distortion modules?
Everything you need on targeted dimensional breaching is there.
Otlично. Have it delivered to this address.
You're not taking it with you?
Is there a problem with my order?
No, I just thought...
Thinking is a dangerous thing, is it not, comrade? Have it delivered to the address. Make sure you are not discovered by Peck.
Believe me, he is half of the reason I am doing this.
And the other half?
Why, for the good of the motherland, of course.
Of course. For the motherland.
Knowing this device was key to releasing her father and Task Force Baldra, she had it sent to Berlin, where she too would shortly go to meet a mysterious contact. Ravanov, seeing the increasing intensity of the experiments in Vietnam, knew he could no longer sit idly by. He made contact with Agent Maxis and began acting as a mole. He agreed to meet her at the outpost where he would be able to produce vital intelligence on Omega. Having been dark for months and knowing it was a risky operation, Sam decided to contact Weaver via telephone and inform him of what she was about to do. Unfortunately for her, this phone call would be exactly what would put her in harm's way. Being a Requiem phone line, the director heard every word and decided it was a perfect opportunity to advance his plan. He made contact with one of his many secrets, none other than Dr. William Peck, and informed him that Maxis would be arriving at the base. He, however, neglected to mention that Ravanov was her contact in Omega. With Maxis now in custody, he also instructed Peck to directly disobey Kravchenko's orders for a comprehensive interrogation and instead throw her into the Dark Aether. Additionally, he did not expect her to get out. It's worth noting that, at this time, Peck didn't know who this contact in Requiem was, only that he could potentially secure him safe passage back to the west and give him a clean slate if things at Omega were not to work out in his favor. Peck started to not only interrogate Samantha, but also started torturing her with no result before proceeding with the director's request, throw Maxis into the other dimension. However, at the moment he did this, an outbreak immediately began at the facility, with the phase consuming the area between the village at the bottom of the firebase and the facility itself. Requiem later believed this to be a result of none other than Maxis, as she grew a multitude of psychotronic powers whilst in the Dark Aether, so we can now assume that those people that Omega were studying with psychotronic powers likely gained them from the Dark Aether, potentially being in contact with the Dark Aether entities. Whilst she was strong enough to resist Peck's interrogation fairly well, the Dark Aether preyed on her weaknesses. Having been thrown in there, her rage began to build up. In her efforts to survive in the barren land, she even went so far as to butcher a group of Omega agents in her sleep, whilst her memory on those events is hazy.
When I opened my eyes, there was blood on my hands. knowing if it was mine. Then I saw the bodies. Omega soldiers. They looked like victims of a frenzied attack. An attack that continued even after they were dead. I have a knife. Do not remember where it came from. I just want to go home. This is a dream. A bad dream. It has to be. That's what I tell myself. Even if it isn't true. What is happening? Why is it happening? I don't know. I don't know anything. I am lost. Please find me. Please.
With Maxis captured, Ravenov contacts Grigori Weaver using the same phone line that Maxis previously had, explaining to him the situation and warning him that they are always listening. Ravenov implores Weaver to send the strike team in. After discussing it with the other senior staff, Weaver does just that.
If any harm comes to her, I will kill you myself.
Operation Lost Property officially begins, in an effort to try and rescue Samantha Maxis, the little lost girl. Arriving at the facility on June 15th, 1984, Peck contacts the strike team over radio and makes a bargain. Turn the facility power back on and he would give up Maxis. After doing just that, however, Peck chided the team for their incredible stupidity. Maxis was in the Dark Aether and totally out of his or their reach. Now that they had restored power, he had transferred all of his research via satellite back to Omega in Russia. Consulting Ravenov, he informed the strike team that Peck kept a truth serum in order to interrogate Ethernauts who had returned without their sanity, in order to get some semblance of a series of events from them. The strike team mixed the serum and gave it to Peck, causing him to explain that in order to recover Maxis, they would need the codes to the portal's mainframe and her dimensional tracking ID. Eventually obtaining these, they restarted the portal, only to find that the truth serum had worn off, and Peck had double-crossed them yet again. Thankfully, Requiem had an ace up its sleeve. Designed for use in Operation Threshold, this secret weapon of Requiem was an orbital laser that used pure Aetherium to pull high-value targets straight from the Dark Aether into our world. Locking onto Sam, the laser blasted the portal chamber and retrieved her. She seemed visibly disorientated as she stumbled out, with a purple glisten seen reflecting in her eyes. Maxis survived the shadowy hellscape long enough to reflect on herself and her path, scavenging weapons and gear to form a new but nostalgic outfit. On their way to escape the facility, the strike team came face to face with their first true elder god in the village, a being known as the Order. Managing to defeat it, they escaped with Sam just as Raptor 1 arrived. Ravenov informed Maxis that he would stay behind in order to carry out ops in the field, as his cover had not yet been blown with Omega, informing her of an operation taking place in the Ural Mountains. Back at Outpost 25, a detachment of Omega soldiers led by Valentina arrived to meet with Peck. To his surprise, Kravchenko also arrived to Vietnam. After having expressed his discontent with Peck's actions, Kravchenko asked him to show a demonstration of his commitment to Omega. Kravchenko then pulled out a knife and cut one of Peck's eyes, just as he did to Weaver prior. Upon returning to Requiem headquarters, Maxis was placed in quarantine before being tested. While Requiem estimated she had only spent roughly 48 hours in the Dark Aether, physiological and metabolic data from the tests indicated she spent several months in the other dimension, like she claimed. They also noted changes in her eyes that were now purple. Requiem also kept her in isolation as they believed she was responsible for the outburst of Aetherium in Outpost 25. She was subsequently questioned by Carver, Strauss and Gray, who were interested with her experience in the Dark Aether. Requiem seized the radio she used to contact the Requiem strike teams. Weaver, who visited her often, decided to give her a female Rottweiler to keep her company. At some point around this time, Carver had started to look into the director's identity, keeping Weaver in the loop with whatever he found. Unbeknownst to him, the director was all too aware of his snooping. During the rapid progress at Outpost 25, Omega also began to operate in the Ural Mountains, as it possessed the world's single largest outbreak zone, and Valentina saw this as a vital new opportunity to forward her plan. Since childhood, Valentina believed she had been hearing the voice of her father, Ulrich Vogel, and recognized this for the first time at around the age of 5, from beginning her research into physics and biochemistry to encouraging her to kill her guardian, Kurtz. This voice was always with her, and now it told her the promised day was almost upon them. First, however, she would need to create something, a weapon capable of setting him free, the reality inversion warheads. Valentina addressed the Soviet Politburo with the plans for Operation Inversion and pushed for Berlin as a target. On July 8th, Peck, now with one less eye, arrived at a missile silo in the Ural outbreak zone with the task of continuing work with Operation Inversion. At around the same time, he began interacting with one of the Dark Aether computers. On the other side was Zykov. Hearing about his new operation, Zykov was miraculously able to help Peck do exactly what he needed: build the inversion warheads, and to do this, he hoarded Tempest from the Dark Aether and gave their location to Peck, who in turn informed the Aethernauts who would collect them. Valentina and Gorev note Peck's obsessive behavior with the computer, but opt not to tell Kravchenko for now. Also around this time, the director via Peck informs Kravchenko about the existence of an entity within the Dark Aether, one in control of all the others, known as the Forsaken. Recognizing this existential threat, but more than that, seeing it as his opportunity to be held as a hero, Kravchenko took control of Operation Inversion on July 22nd. His intention: wait for the Forsaken to enter our world and use the missiles to destroy him, or at the very least, send him back. Requiem, now recognizing the colossal gap between their and Omega's knowledge of the Dark Aether, begin big operations in the Ural Mountains outbreak zone, part of Operation Threshold. Though this seems incredibly precarious, the fact that here, East and West were performing experiments so secret that even being revealed would threaten world peace, and meant that both sides were effectively unable to start a public conflict over these skirmishes. All the while, at Requiem headquarters, believing Maxis to be the cause of the outbreak at Outpost 25, and growing concerns of her experience in the Dark Aether, a vote is held with the department heads as to whether or not she should be given field operative status, but this is declined, failing by one vote, and was kept inside Requiem HQ for several months. Valentina, frustrated by the change in the nature of Operation Inversion, is consolidated by the voice she believes is her father, who tells her not to worry. Under his instructions, she leaks Inversion's documentation to Sergei Ravenov, who in turn leaks it to Maxis, still interred at Requiem. Somewhat abusing the more than special trust that she has been building with Dr. Gray, Maxis convinces Gray to give her access to her communications protocols. Using this, she contacts the strike team and Ravenov and directs them to meet up at Ruka. On November 16th, 1984, meeting Ravenov face to face once again, the strike team successfully acquired the launch keys for the Inversion missiles, changing the location to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far out of harm's way, and getting in the way of Omega's plan. Just as they are preparing to leave, however, a legion of Tempests begin flying towards the silos through two colossal Dark Aether portals in the sky, joining together into one colossal Tempest, incidentally blocking the silos with a large Aetherium power node crystals. The strike team managed to defeat this giant Tempest, in turn clearing the silo blockages and successfully launched the missiles. In the weeks following the event at Ruka, the strike team was cleared to return to active duty after almost facing a court-martial, only to be spared by none other than the director of Requiem, as he had bigger plans and he needed them to be in play. During their interactions, Gray had noted strange occurrences with Maxis, specifically in one instance a book moving. More importantly, having seen her notes about these events on the Requiem mainframe, warns her that people above their pay grade can see them too.
Eva, I don't know what to say.
There's nothing to say. Your lack of military experience is no excuse for what you did. You knew better, and you did it anyway.
I just wanted to let her talk to the team. I didn't know what she was gonna...
One thing you're not is stupid. But I also don't think you're a traitor. Which is why I'm taking the heat on this one. No one upstairs is aware of your role in Sam's little side operation. And that's how it'll stay. As long as you never fucking cross me again. Understood?
Yes.
How is she anyway?
Agent Maxis is still showing high levels of Aetherium contamination in her bloodstream. But the way it's affecting her is different than any other subject I've observed.
Meaning?
It's not just her eyes. There are things happening on a cellular level I can't quantify yet.
You keep your notes in our central database, yes? And that would explain the new orders. The director wants to run more specialized tests on Maxis. If you're asked to cooperate, you do as instructed. Are we clear?
Yes, sir.
Great. Remember, if it's on the mainframe, everyone above my pay grade can access it. If there's something you want to tell me, you tell me in person.
I promise, Weaver. I won't keep anything else from you.
I'm glad we understand each other. Dismissed.
Weaver, disappointed in Gray for allowing Sam to get the better of her and enabling the events at Ruka, scolds her and warned her to never cross his path ever again. He also confronted Maxis and, after a heated exchange, confined her to her quarters with no more walks around the facility with her dog. Unfortunately, Gray's warning came too late. By this point, the director had already marked Sam down for special tests, and Weaver received new orders from him on December 1st and had Maxis taken away for additional testing. Based on reports from Gray about the high levels of Aetherium contamination in her bloodstream and changes on a cellular level. As she was taken away, Weaver promised to take care of her dog. On December 3rd, after 2 days of travel, Maxis arrived at Block 8, a classified facility of the CIA built with an Aetherium seal. She was maintained in isolation after she attempted to flee the facility upon arrival. Maxis was subjected to several interrogation sessions led by the director of Requiem to access her powers. After 15 days, the director managed to push her by stating that nobody at Requiem was caring for her and that she was just a sad little lost girl. Filled with anger, Maxis used her telekinetic abilities to break the glass in the room.
Hello, Mr. Director.
Oh, you heard me come in. You're very perceptive, aren't you? Do you know how long you've been here?
Not counting bathroom breaks and mandatory exercise. 15 days. As of today.
And still no breakthrough?
What kind of breakthrough do you want? Your only goal seems to be trying to make me angry. But I'm not. Just disappointed.
You're probably going to be more disappointed when this session is over. You do know that none of them really care for you. Strauss, Carver, Weaver, even Gray. They've barely inquired as to your current situation.
That's not true. They wouldn't want me to be here. You're just trying to manipulate me. Test my emotional responses.
Like you did with them? Do you even know how much trouble you caused for your Requiem friends? Going behind their backs on your little secret squirrel mission with Ravenov.
I looked Weaver in the eye when I was taken to be brought here. He didn't want this.
You like him, don't you?
Not in the way you think. We just have history. Shared history. Shared trauma. You wouldn't understand.
I do understand. In fact, I was very forgiving about the whole thing. I mean, given Weaver's failures and lapses in security, I could easily have had him disappeared.
Don't test me.
Maybe I still should.
I'm warning you!
What on earth could you possibly do to me? You really are just a pathetic, sad, little, lost... Oh dear. I suppose you'll have to replace that glass now. But At least we're making progress.
The director continued to torture Maxis over the next 2 months. At around this time, Kava begins doing more digging into the exact nature of the Dark Aether. Thanks to his military career, he was the first to recognize the parallel between the power structure in the Dark Aether and that of an army. He noticed the different factions and hierarchy, and that there was a clear order system. His question though, who was the commander-in-chief? Kava found that very answer lying on the director's desk, confirming his worst fears. There was an exceptionally powerful being at the top, and it was growing in power. None other than the Forsaken. As well as this, Peck continues his communications with Zykov. Frustrated at the failure of Operation Inversion, Peck inquired as to whether Zykov could help him get more Tempest to attempt it again. However, Zykov assured him that this was not necessary. Instead, he would help Zykov build a device that would be able to stop the Forsaken, a way to bring Zykov home. In doing this, Zykov would be able to give Omega the knowledge necessary to kill the Forsaken. On November 30th, Kravchenko reported that the missiles couldn't get recovered and belonged to the ocean. He soon decided to take direct actions against Requiem and tasked Dr. Hugo Jaeger, head of necroanalytics and a man with somewhat ancestral ties to the Dark Aether, to infiltrate the small group of defected scientists led by a Dr. Zakova. Being informed that there are traitors within Omega, Jaeger's mission was to eliminate the scientists and set up a trap for Requiem's elite strike team. This operation was called Operation Isichenye, or Operation Excision in English. Gaining their trust, Jaeger contacts Ravenov, now officially disavowed from Russia for his part in the events at Ruka, and tells him they wish to defect. Ravenov, too happy to strike a blow at Omega, arranges with Requiem to have them extracted. Kravchenko also becomes suspicious of Valentina after learning from Gorev that Peck had been talking to Zykov from one of the modified computers and planned to speak with her directly. Jaeger informs Kravchenko and expresses his pleasure in the opportunity to deal with the traitors personally. All he will need is a helicopter. The Colonel is all too happy to oblige. On December 14th, Weaver contacted the strike team to meet Ravenov and the Omega 8. The strike team arrive back in the Ural Mountains, this time at the sanatorium, and link up with Ravenov, who informs them there is a downed helicopter. Upon locating the crash site, Jaeger, speaking via recorded message, informs the strike team that the scientists were shot down, but have escaped to Monument Island. This is through the phase, but Dr. Zakova's new invention, the Aetherium Neutralizer, allowed them to cross through. Jaeger explains there is another neutralizer waiting for the strike team, but they will have to power through it themselves.
Hello? Scheiße. Ravenov, it is Dr. Hugo Jaeger. I hope either you or Requiem find this recording. Most of us survived the crash. We're headed to Monument Island. I hope we'll be safe from Omega. Before you ask, yeah, that is on the other side of the phase, but the scientists I'm with, they have created something incredible. A device that will allow us to travel through the phase without dying. Or worse. They only have one prototype, but they are assembling another from spare parts so you can follow us. Unfortunately, we are missing a component, an ethereal orb. Find one and bring it to the bridge. There will be a slightly modified recon rover waiting for you. Please hurry. Omega shot us down. They will not leave the job unfinished.
So, finding an ethereal orb and a strange toy bunny rabbit, the strike team power the neutralizer and cross the phase, arriving at the island home to a monument. However, they find the corpses of the Omega 8 scientists and another log from Jaeger, expressing his hatred for traitors and wishing auf Wiedersehen to the strike team. Jaeger also indicated that the Aetherium neutralizer was now in Omega's possession. As the monument was being overrun with an order appearing, Weaver ordered the team to leave the area. They managed to defeat Order, and Raptor 1 arrived soon after to exfil the team, but they were shot down by Omega on their way out. Kravchenko arrived at the crash site. As Omega soldiers dragged Raptor 1's body out of the helicopter, Kravchenko ordered the team to surrender. They were captured soon after. Peck continues his communique with the director and is beginning to suspect his identity. The director instructs Peck that instead of seeking to kill the Forsaken, he should instead attempt to capture it, and gives him the schematics of a device capable of containing the creature. Peck informs Kravchenko of this, though lies and says that Zykov told him of this new plan. The Colonel is more than happy with the idea of gaining a new superweapon for the USSR. Valentina makes her move. She goes to Berlin and finds Endstation's Berlin lab within the sewers. Constructing a small-scale inversion warhead, she opens the gateway there and enters the Dark Aether, changing her. Finally meeting with her father, she realizes something is wrong, but by this point it is too far gone to consider the implications. She then waits for the armies to assemble at the head of the portal. It should be noted that due to the dimensional fertility in Berlin and the more advanced nature of the portal, the gateway here is incredibly stable. Meanwhile, CIA agents stationed in Berlin locate a dead drop that wasn't meant for them. Inside, they discover information on Projekt Janus. The director quickly sends out Requiem's work-in-progress AI, Klaus, to handle the situation. Klaus slowly killed each agent one by one and destroyed the documents they found. There is some speculation that potentially the AI of Klaus is in fact based on the director, allowing him to do his bidding whilst him not being physically there. Realizing that Valentina had betrayed him on February 2nd, 1985, in order to put a stop to her, Kravchenko decides to send in Requiem's invincible strike team. After being held prisoner in Potsdam for several weeks, Kravchenko uses Raptor 1's life as leverage, as he did manage to survive the crash. Locating the Berlin Endstation lab, they realize Valentina is already within the Dark Aether. They activate Klaus and finish what the CIA agent started, retrieving the components to build an inversion warhead to close the gateway. Unfortunately, in order to properly purify the crystals, they would need a being made of concentrated Aetherium. Luckily, Valentina in her new form was just this. They fight and defeat Valentina using her to complete the warhead, and have Klaus enter the gateway to detonate the warhead from the other side. Kravchenko, bringing Raptor 1 into the open, fires at the strike team, believing now is the time to tie up loose ends. The strike team are able to escape though, thanks to Agent Maxis, who from her cell in Block 8 manifests a portal for them. The director watches this from his office and notes that Projekt Janus can now proceed, but that Maxis' growing powers may be an issue for it. Almost instantaneously after the strike team's victory in Berlin, the Outbreak Zones began to exhibit new behavior. Swirling vortices of primordial Aetherium appeared, and where previously terraforming occurred through a long process of creating and growing the giant power node crystals, one of these vortices could create a power node in 1/4 of the time. Alarmingly, this allowed new outbreak zones seemingly unconnected to the Ural Mountains but on a similar scale to appear. In these outbreak zones they encounter Piotr, a lost soul who almost succumbed to the Dark Aether but was saved at the brink by his encounter with Sam. Now, by hiding in the loot chest, he is able to briefly cross over back into the real world and help the strike team, though is eventually pulled back by the Forsaken. The director during this time continued his work with Sam in Block 8, performing further psychologically intensive tests in order to allow her to correctly harness her powers. This included forcing her to kill an Omega soldier with her mind, otherwise her closest, more than a friend Grey, would be shot. During one session, he threatened to shoot her dog if she didn't teleport her somewhere safe. By the end of this experience, however, Maxis claims she realizes the director was right, and that he had made her realize that she was a good soul. She also admits to the strike team that she was indeed the cause for the outbreak at Outpost 25. During the director's interrogations, he constantly uses leverage against Maxis, knowing a lot about her, that being because he is none other than Eddie Richtofen and clearly remembers events of the old Aetherverse, whilst Maxis' memory is hazy. It is unclear as to why this is the case. We know that Samantha Maxis and Eddie Richtofen entered this new universe holding hands. It is possible that some sort of event happened that separated the two and caused Samantha to forget memories. It is unclear as to what exactly happened, we will just have to see as the storyline continues. Knowing her character, this made it easier for Eddie to manipulate her, reassuring her that she's a good soul. Furthermore, the director also once again addressed the same shadowy group he had done shortly after the Berlin incident, referring to them as the redacted board of directors, explaining that despite them wanting to use the Berlin gateway for Projekt Janus, had he not closed it, the Forsaken would have destroyed them all. He recognizes the fact that the destruction of the world isn't necessarily a big motivation for them, and so instead notes that an apocalypse wouldn't be particularly good for their and their shareholders' pockets either, insinuating that they are a cabal of uber-rich individuals who require Janus for a hidden agenda. As the strike team dealt with these new threats in the outbreak zones, Zykov once again made contact. contact, explaining that with this increase in terraforming, the world's only hope is to bring him home, so that he can stop the Forsaken, while simultaneously telling Peck the same thing. Unlike Requiem, however, Omega had already fully committed to bringing Zykov back to Earth and had even designated a location, a former testing ground for Operation Inversion, test site Anna in Ukraine. Due to the heavy use of primordial Aetherium in the lead up to Inversion, the dimensional veil here is particularly thin, and the infrastructure already on site make it ideal for the high voltage power required to power the machinery, specifically a replica of the Endstation cyclotron and an amplifier to allow Zykov to be untangled from the darkest depths of the Dark Aether and brought back. Initially intended for July 4th of 1985, Kravchenko forced Peck to complete the amplifier and cyclotron an entire month sooner, driven by his desire to please his superiors. Realizing Kravchenko's overwhelming egomania, Peck once again contacted the director, and finally makes a deal to secure his extraction to the west. In return, he would give Requiem the exact location and time of Zykov's extraction, as well as letting the director take the containment chamber. He now realized that this was the director's plan all along, and also realized his identity as the director. Gorev and Jaeger, unaware of Peck's scheming and equally frightened of Kravchenko's ensuing madness, make a deal with one another. If things begin to go wrong, they will defect, with Jaeger claiming he has a contact who will employ them due to their knowledge of the Dark Aether. As Kravchenko was Gorev's mentor, this is incredibly significant. Finally, Ravenov once again made contact with Weaver, informing him of Operation Izbavitel. Unbeknownst to Weaver, the director is already aware of this thanks to Peck, but takes Ravenov's intel as a chance to independently verify the time and location of this operation. With all his pieces now in play, the director is finally ready to proceed with Operation First Domino. In the early hours of June 4th, 1985, the strike team infiltrates the site, aided not by Raptor 1 this time, but by a portal from Sam, still in Block 8. As they make their way through the base, they find it noticeably empty, and already crawling with undead. In an effort to start the cyclotron and amplifier to free Zykov, an outbreak was caused, though this was seemingly of no real care or consequence to Kravchenko.
This is Dr. William Peck. It is the 4th of June, 1985, 9:32 a.m. This is test number 8 for dimensional extraction.
Must you start with that every single record?
Oh, deja vu all over again. All teams are in position, ready to proceed. Colonel?
Activating resonator. Beginning magnetic amplification. Well, what does it show?
Dimensional barrier identified. Proceeding with scan. Barrier membrane is fluctuating. Increase voltage output by 10.
Anything?
We're picking up something. I'm just not sure what.
It's him. I know it.
We can't be sure.
Increasing voltage output by 20.
By 20? What, are you insane?
Don't you dare.
Damn it!
Captain, get your men into position. I want the threat neutralized now. Captain?
Shit.
Redirecting a light. Proceeding with second scan.
Wait, what are you doing? We need to close that gateway immediately.
We will do no such thing.
Aetherium levels are spiking across the facility. Your men...
Mine are loyal to Omega. We were the first. We are the last. That portal does not close. Not until we have Zykov.
Ending the facility lockdown, the strike team reached the observation tower just in time to see Zykov's arrival, who thanked them for setting him free.
My friends, you did it. You brought me home. I have long awaited this day to take what is mine.
Unfortunately for everyone, both Requiem and Omega have been manipulated, just as Valentina was before them, and Zykov was in reality the Forsaken. Valentina's father, who she believed had been guiding her throughout her life, was actually the Forsaken, and we had been similarly manipulated. He had also tried to manipulate many others prior, but unfortunately was unsuccessful. He lets the strike team know that he had been aiding them with mended perk machines, the pack-a-punch, crafting tables, and power-ups all along so that they would eventually be able to free him. He was the demonic voice we heard speaking to us all along. Importantly though, Kazimir Zykov was not just another stolen identity. When he arrived in the Dark Aether, he really was Kazimir Zykov, but the centuries he spent inside fundamentally changed him. As he transformed, he explained that the 40 years in the outside world were 4 centuries in the Dark Aether, and during that time he was guided by nothing but the will to survive, killing and consuming everything in his way until there was nothing left, in turn absorbing everyone's powers, becoming the hierarchical lord of the Dark Aether. Having sacrificed himself back when he was still a human to close the cyclotron, as a soldier in what was called the War to End All Wars, World War II, he was truly disgusted to see the world once again fall to conflicts he saw as pathetic, especially as during this time he had ended the wars of the Elder Gods of the Dark Aether by force and consumed them, and brought his order to the once chaotic place. Now he plans to do the same to the outside world. Just as the Forsaken begins to cause a huge outbreak, Sam teleports to the base, saying she knows what she has to do. She begins to fight the Forsaken, keeping him distracted, but urges the strike team to get to her as soon as possible. As this happens, Gorev and Jaeger, circling the facility in their helicopter, notice the explosion. They hear Kravchenko on the radio asking them for help, but Jaeger convinces Gorev that they flee instead, knowing now that Omega Group is done for and the Soviet Union will likely kill or exile them for their failure.
My God, if that is what I think it is, things have gone very poorly.
It would seem your prediction was correct. That is the Forsaken noticeably absent from his cage. Goryev! Jaeger? Where are you?
Wait. Do not answer. Not yet.
I must respond, Jaeger.
I think not, my friend.
Goryev, I need reinforcements.
Listen to me. Answering makes us part of this. As it stands right now, we could still be back at the base, oblivious to what has transpired here.
Ah, I see. Maybe the phase consumed the complex. Communications went down, yeah?
Exactly. Let the failure fall to him, and him alone. I think it's time we made our exit.
As the team move through the now terraformed base, the Requiem staff say their only real option is to construct an Aetherium neutralizer, as the path to Sam and the Forsaken is completely blocked by the phase. Thankfully, in the time since the burned blueprint of it was recovered in Operation Excision, Strauss had his time to refine it to such a degree that it can be constructed in an emergency, if the right materials are found by the strike team. In order to get the fuel for the neutralizer, however, they would need something powerful enough to shatter the giant Aetherium crystals now found throughout the facility. Luckily, someone in the Dark Aether is now taking a great interest in the strike team. Though we know little about him, an entity lives within the Dark Aether known as Sparagmus, and he is zealous in his belief in the Old Ones, the beings who ruled over the Dark Aether before being killed and consumed by the Forsaken. Back when the Dark Aether was a much more chaotic place, not only this, but Sparagmus's disciples were also brought into the Forsaken's army. Feeling great anger at this, he sent about forging a weapon that could slay the Forsaken, the Chrysolax. This weapon is made of 3 crystals, 2 of which can be acquired naturally. The third, however, the polymorphic crystal, is special. The Zealot created this crystal himself and it belongs to him, so it is impossible for the Chrysolax to be created without his guidance, as it is intrinsically bonded to him. Once the strike team requires the Chrysolax to destroy the giant's crystals and gain the fuel for the neutralizer, the polymorphic crystal mysteriously happens to fall out of the dimensional anomaly above the facility. Now with the weapon, the strike team were able to fuel the neutralizer and reach the Forsaken. As they begin down the tunnel, Peck seemingly shoots a gas line in the observation tower, causing a massive explosion and leaving the fate of both him and Kravchenko unknown for the moment.
You idiot! Watch where you're shooting! The gas line!
Oh my God. Are they... Do you think they're alright?
Can't say they didn't get what they deserve, but damn.
And thus ended the tale of Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Fucking fool.
So far, most of the events have been in line with the events of the campaigns, and like I said at the start, only one version of events will be canon to the new universe, or potentially even none at all if they decide to steer away from sticking close to the campaigns that we know. If Kravchenko did in fact manage to survive the incident, and he is still canon to the events that we saw in Black Ops 2's campaign, he will ultimately become disillusioned with the USSR, believing that the Soviet Union was dying out. As a result, Kravchenko would seek to obtain as much wealth as he could before his country eventually collapsed around him, and would begin to take advantage of his position in the military and sell Soviet weaponry and other armaments on the black market. Stationed in Afghanistan, one of his most prominent and wealthy clients would be none other than Raul Menendez, a Nicaraguan crime lord who would go on to run a powerful drug cartel. But that's just if Kravchenko manages to survive and the events are still canon that we see in the campaigns. Right now, his fate is uncertain, but the game does make light of the fact that if Omega does in fact collapse at test site Anna, that he would have to do none other than reside to Afghanistan. That could be suggesting that the events are still canon, or potentially it's just joking about the matter at the mere possibility as opposed to it actually happening. Entering the Forsaken's chamber, the strike team broke his armor while Sam charged his Aetherium turrets, allowing the team to tear the entity apart limb by limb. Eventually, this exposes a giant gateway to the Dark Aether within the Forsaken himself. Partway through the battle, the Forsaken shows the strike team a vision of Weaver, Strauss, Carver, and Gray in a prison, each having been killed by a bullet to the head, with the message "No one escapes alive" written on the wall. This could just be a fear tactic, or potentially he may know the future, or at least a possible future. After all, the Dark Aether is a culmination of time. With the Forsaken almost dead, he suddenly lets out a burst of energy, almost killing the strike team and rapidly causing outbreak zones to appear across the world. This even causing the total collapse of the Ural Mountains outbreak zones into pure phase. Sam, knowing what she had to do, laments the director's most likely manipulative words that she's a good person before sacrificing herself by entering the red anomaly at the Forsaken's core, defeating him but trapping herself in the Dark Aether in the process. With the Forsaken weakened enough, the containment chamber activated, absorbing the Forsaken and sealing him inside. As Requiem celebrated their victory, the director addressed the redacted board of directors once again, and informs them that they have successfully captured the Forsaken and that Maxis is now locked within the Dark Aether, just as he intended. This meaning she is no longer a problem for Projekt Janus. The strike team were to be sent to Black Site 13 for indefinite containment, and Requiem was to be shut down, with this mysterious group's agents moving on Weaver, Strauss, Carver, and Gray. Samantha Maxis' jumper can be seen in the background as she is dragged away. Shortly after this, the Requiem heads of department each find themselves arrested by military police and taken away, along with the strike team and Raptor 1, who are similarly apprehended. The director watches this unfold from screens in his office. Everything went according to plan, picking his case up from his desk where we can see a photo of his past as an Air Force pilot and another with his wife and son, along with a familiar snow globe with a house inside it. The director leaves his office, possibly for the last time. Eddie has shut down Requiem and will now proceed with the next phase of Projekt Janus. 5 years later, in 1990, a hooded man approaches a Japanese fisherman and requests to rent a boat to a place off the island's nation's eastern coast. When the fisherman says that there is nothing there and asks what he is looking for, Peck, now severely burned but still alive, responds that he's searching for some old friends, referring to Weaver, Strauss, Carver, and Gray. It's likely that he wants to travel to the spot in the Pacific Ocean where the Operation Inversion warheads laid. The walls between the world and the Dark Aether may be weakened here.
What is it you're looking for? I'm looking for some old friends.
One of the most important details that will be present in Vanguard is the rule of the Old Ones. Prior to the Forsaken, the Dark Aether was a much more primitive place akin to the medieval times, with hundreds of kingdoms constantly at war since the beginning of time. Except in the Dark Aether, instead of kings and kingdoms, you have elder gods and tribes. Visually, it was a lot more demonic and hell-like in nature with a rich red aesthetic. For a long time, Kortifex the Deathless, the mightiest lord of the Dark Aether, had managed to exert considerable control over the Dark Aether, although unlike Zykov, who absorbed everything in his path, Kortifex seemingly made alliances and political moves with or against the rival Old Ones, slowly gaining control. Kortifex launched the Nether Wars against his rivals and eventually started losing allies, though, which caused some of his loyals to switch sides to a resistance that was forming against him. The resistance beat him back and took over the throne. The four Old Ones that have it out for him are Nauticus the Conqueror, the most acclaimed general who once led Kortifex's armies in the Dark Aether, now they are sworn enemies, Sarakix the Shadow, who is a wicked trickster who sees humans as playthings, Invictor the Destroyer, who is the ultimate frontline fighter, at home in the thick of battle and always out for blood, and Belikar the Warlock, who is a master of Dark Aether rune magic, fascinated by humans and their warlike ways. Now Kortifex wants revenge against them. Luckily for him, he now has an ace up his sleeve. An important plot point about Vanguard that Trek have explicitly told us is that the beings of the Dark Aether have had contact with humans for a very long time, and influenced ancient human culture, as we see by the carvings everywhere, from Egypt to Mexico and many more. Sarakix mentions the day they discovered humanity, and the events that led to that are quite interesting. She says that one day, the Mystery Box, the Pack-a-Punch, and other mysterious artifacts began appearing in the Dark Aether, and this was the factor that led to them realizing there was more to reality than just the Dark Aether. Sarakix, as well as the other demons, began to watch and interact with humanity after discovering the outside world. Her earliest observations were of humans before they had discovered agriculture, which puts the date at around 9500 BC. This allows us to extrapolate something important. The universe of Vanguard and Cold War was seemingly created during Tale Der Toten, but Samantha and Eddie did not reappear in the timeline until the 1960s. This gives the Dark Aether demons plenty of time to interact with humanity before the events of our story, and does kind of imply that many Elder Gods may have existed within the Dark Aether prior to the new universe being created. Our understanding of the Dark Aether was previously very limited, with us just having an idea of the Apothecans and Keepers battling it out, with the Apothecans being banished in there. But the Dark Aether is way more complex than that, and there's a bunch of beings in there that we are finally starting to learn about. After interacting through various mystical means like fires, hallucinations, and worship, the Dark Aether entities begin to crave a way to better view and interact with our world, as they could not enter it in the physical form. As a solution, they would invent artifacts, a means of placing your essence inside an object and sending it into the real world. Essentially a genie trapped in a bottle. When someone makes a covenant with them via these artifacts, they can speak to and see through this person. Sarakix, Belikar, Invictor, Nauticus, and Kortifex all create artifacts. They each attempt to mimic the cultures of the people they had been interacting with, except Kortifex, who simply stuck to pyramids on a stick. Invictor, for example, granted his sword to the ancient Greeks, who initially viewed him as the god of war, Ares. After bonding with the Greek hero Achilles and helping him in the siege of Troy, their two legends became inseparable, and Invictor would later be believed to be the spirit of Achilles himself. Sarakix, meanwhile, took a particular interest in the Japanese people, with them believing her to be Kitsune, a mischievous fox spirit. Nauticus was believed by the ancient Norse to be the Emir, the father of the frost giants. Belikar appeared to the ancient Maya of Central America, and Kortifex cultivated worship from the ancient Egyptians, likely being associated with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. At some point after the early 1800s, but before the First World War, it seems like the connection was severed. The reasoning behind this is Sarakix telling us of interacting with humans during the late Edo period, but Von List having to teach Kortifex of World War I, which means by 1914 they had no access to our world. This leads to the artifacts becoming dormant and the influence on the human world ceasing. That is, up until Projekt Endstation breaches the dimensional veil. In 1944, the moment this happens, the artifacts activate once again. Unfortunately, they are in the possession of SS Oberfuhrer Wolfram von List. List, the great uncle of Jaeger. Von List leads a division called Die Wahrheit, who scoured the world searching for mystical artifacts of unconventional power in order to gain a strategic advantage over the Allies, and enabled through Reichsfuhrer Heinrich Himmler's obsession with the occult. They search for items that appear only in myths and legend, forcing scholars and academics to help them, such as Thor's hammer, the Holy Grail, Shangri-La, and Atlantis itself. When the artifacts activated, Von List bonded with Kortifex, who gave him the power to raise the dead. This is likely in exchange for some greater goal that we are currently unaware of. A demonologist, Professor Gabriel Kraft, was also forced to work with the Battalion. It was Kraft's knowledge of the occult that led Von List to the artifacts. The backstory for this is prior in 1939, Von List arrived unannounced at Leipzig University, Germany, and met with a professor of demonology that I just mentioned, Gabriel Kraft. Von List told Kraft he had to tender his resignation immediately, pack a suitcase, and go with Von List as an advisor on an overseas Die Wahrheit expedition. After Kraft laughed at the ludicrous suggestion, Von List showed he was deadly serious, took his gun from his belt, and killed Kraft's assistant. Then, Von List had Kraft thrown in an SS prison with a dozen other experts who had similarly been recruited from universities and museums. The officer arrived and informed the explorers, historians, and archaeologists that they will find the artifacts they were searching for, despite the fact that they all knew these were objects of legend, not fact. Kraft latched out, saying he knew what the Nazis were doing as he'd seen his friends dragged off to camps. Von List simply smiled, and instead of shooting Kraft, he sent the men to the professor's home and had his spouse taken to an interrogation cell. Now, should Kraft refuse, it wasn't he who'd suffer the consequences, but the love of his life. Knowing he had to now follow the orders of Von List, Kraft made a silent promise that he would somehow, someday, destroy Die Wahrheit from within. Jumping back to where we were, after Von List bonded with Kortifex, allowing Von List to act as Kortifex's physical body, he returned to the city of Stalingrad and used his new power to raise an army of zombies in service to the Third Reich due to him being angry at the Nazis losing Stalingrad. His goal is to raise the millions who died on the Eastern Front, yet Kortifex isn't strong enough to fully do so yet. Kraft sent a distress call to the Allied Special Forces to help save himself, as Von List has locked him into an area, who was soon deployed in the city. However, they became trapped in a containment spell by Kortifex and were forced to face Von List's undead army. The spell acts as an EMP that stops them from calling for help. Somehow, the Special Forces become bonded with the core four gods. Von List is in a rush to turn the tide of the war, however time is running out for the Nazis. The Allies are preparing to retake Europe, and this is putting a lot of stress on him, because his million undead army isn't ready yet. On the other hand, Nauticus is contemplating how he got there. Once being a general, the commander of the Knight Legions, he was someone to fear. Yet now he's just stuck to a human. He just wants to get back to the Dark Aether. Bellicar believes World War II is the biggest event in human history and thinks that it's her duty to help us. Sarakix is intrigued at the idea of helping us, whilst Invicta is very angry at the idea of it. Within Stalingrad, several portals appear, leading to other places trapped in the spell, such as Paris and Normandy in France, and an army camp in Japanese territory, Shinonuma. The artifacts would help the Allied Special Forces bond with the aforementioned other old ones who had it out for Kortifex, and with their help they will eventually overthrow Kortifex. Despite the entities helping us, they are not friendly and simply aided in an attempt to overthrow him. The most important thing to discuss from Vanguard at this current moment in time that's relevant to the future of the sequel to Cold War Zombies' storyline is the Societe Occult. Whilst we've only begun to get information about this mysterious group, we know a few important facts already. The organization has existed at least since the medieval times and still exists by the time of Vanguard Zombies. The Societe are a group of rich and powerful people who know of the Dark Aether and have used its dark magic to gain power many times throughout history, spending years meeting different Dark Aether entities and learning from them. They wrote all of their knowledge of rune magic in the Tomb of Rituals in order to enhance the abilities of the Dark Aether artifacts. They used to meet constantly in different places, using ever-changing hideouts, until one day an artifact and Freemason named Lucien Porrit, a high-ranking member of the Societe, constructed the Hotel Royale in Paris. He had specific designs for the hotel and built it on top of catacombs that were lined with bodies. And these catacombs were in the shape of a giant Dark Aether rune. We learn that areas of mass death/casualty cause weak points between the regular universe and the Dark Dark Aether. Considering that the Der Toten bunker keeps appearing throughout Zombies, and just so happens to be the spot of the first breach in the dimensional veil, it really makes you wonder just what exactly happened at this site to create such dimensional fragility. After this, there is a large amount of unknown, until the 1920s when something happens that shakes the Societe occult so badly they split the Tomb of Rituals into individual pages, and each member takes a page into hiding. It is here they remain until Dr. Kraft stumbles upon a page working for Von List, and Kraft would soon betray him and relay this information to the Special Forces as well. And now, with both sides aware of the Tomb of Rituals and the power these pages will hold, the race is on, but mysteriously, Von List redirects forces to Egypt and says their mission is critical to protecting Kortefex and is thus the highest priority for Die Wahrheit. This seems strange considering how important the hunt for the rest of the pages of the tomb should be. What we can say is likely is that Kortefex is defeated by the end of the game. The Tomb of Rituals will be reassembled and Egypt will likely be a map location. It seems not only that Kortefex is defeated, but that he's also absorbed by Zykov. What's very interesting about this, however, is that one of the oldest Zykov journal entries we received was him finding a dead corpse of an elder god. Knowing what we know now, he likely absorbed it after he found it. It could be that this was in fact Kortefex and that he was Zykov's first absorption. Something off topic but related is that Kortefex seemingly implies that he wasn't even born on Earth, leading the possibilities for the future of the Dark Aether storyline to be practically infinite. We learn that Zykov was the very first human to live long enough to become an elder god. Due to Zykov consuming all of the old ones and their powers, this is why he was able to use their powers against us in his final moments, and likely was able to raise the dead thanks to the consumption of Kortefex. The Societe occult also presents an interesting theory for the future. Could they be the people that the director, Eddie Richtofen, is working on his Projekt Janus with? And since Requiem archives seem to have tons of information and artifacts from the Vanguard Zombies story, could Eddie be in possession of the Tomb of Rituals? Only time will tell. For now, we are left to wait on the rest of Vanguard season to finish out this story, but we can ponder the implications of what we've learned so far. We know that Der Anfang's main quest, yet to release, will see the introduction of an unexpected ally that will help us in defeating Kortefex. Could this be Spragmus, the devoted follower of the Old Ones? From a purely gameplay perspective, this would also make a lot of sense, as it would allow a lore reason for a new wonder weapon from the Dark Aether to be introduced. Just like the Chrysalax, or maybe this person will be someone else, such as Reznov, considering we are in Stalingrad after all. In terms of the perks in Vanguard Zombies, they follow a non-traditional system in this game, and are demon blood, or to be more realistic, the blood of entities within the Dark Aether. It is implied that when consumed, this blood becomes a part of the Special Forces team. If we think about this from the scientific perspective we get in Cold War, this is no different to developing powers from Aetherium exposure on a large scale like we see with Sam, but on a smaller scale the exact same thing happens when we drink perks in Cold War. So by drinking the Dark Aether entities' blood that have been exposed to mass exposure from being in the Dark Aether for so long and becoming powerful, we are able to use their abilities. Yet more interesting new information about the Pack-a-Punch is that the entities are unaware of who made it. Invictor says whoever it was, they must have been a genius at the forge. Maybe a reference to Jeb Brown, the machine's original creator. Invictor specifically also gives us two pieces of information which are quite shocking given everything we know so far. The first piece is that he says he has seen such crucibles like this in the Dark Aether, and that they use powerful magic, implying that in this new world without Element 115, the method of upgrading weapons uses some sort of Dark Aether rune magic, and that other beings in the Dark Aether have been doing it for a while. So in the prior Aetherverse, this Dark Aether rune magic was probably a thing then too. At the end of Vanguard's campaign, Task Force Vanguard is set up. Lucas finds a document mentioning Projekt Nova, one of the most infamous plot devices in Call of Duty history, introduced in Black Ops 1, and it was a toxic gas that violently killed anyone who came in contact with it. Sleeper agents were put inside each US state capital and programmed to release Nova 6 gas once they heard a series of numbers, but Alex Mason and Jason Hudson managed to stop it. Paulina also finds a file regarding Projekt Aether, noting it mentions something about reviving the dead. This is likely just an umbrella term for what Von List is up to. A character in Vanguard is Lewis Howard and is voiced by Marcus Howard. Lewis Howard is actually related to Marcus Howard from Call of Duty World War II, Sledgehammer Games' previous game, and they are both voice acted by Russell Richardson, who also plays Cormac in Advanced Warfare. warfare. The thing is though, they are apparently brothers in the canon, so World War II is somehow canon to Vanguard, but we are not exactly sure how much because obviously a lot of canon kind of contradicts itself, but they are probably going to have to retcon a lot of stuff from Call of Duty World War II to make sense in Vanguard, especially because we had World War II Zombies, and that surely can't be canon to Vanguard Zombies in the Dark Aether timeline. Butcher 2 was introduced from World War II, so I wonder if they are also going to retcon World War II Zombies to fit into the Dark Aether storyline, and people like Barbarossa could end up just being someone who bonded with a Dark Aether entity, his sword being an artifact, and the God King could be an Elder God. But yeah, at this moment in time, it's unclear as to just how much is canon. Maybe they'll just be crossover characters and nothing more, and World War II Zombies isn't indeed canon. With that said, that's everything we know about Vanguard Zombies thus far. Going past Vanguard to Trek's next title, likely slated for 2023, set 5 years later in 1990, it seems certain that the old ones will return. Zealous Spragmus implies on the ancient parchments for the Chrysalax that once the Forsaken is dead, the old ones will return. It's currently uncertain, however, as to whether they are in the containment chamber along with Zykov or back in the Dark Aether. Potentially when Samantha shot into the red portal, she in turn freed them. We believe it to be red because Zykov consumed the old ones, and the Dark Aether may actually be restored to a more primitive form like in Vanguard upon the collapse of the Forsaken's rule. Despite the Forsaken being the main antagonist, maybe his presence was overall a good thing just because of the fact that he did kind of restore order to the Dark Aether and kept the old ones under control by consuming them, even though it was basically a dictatorship. So it will be interesting to see what the Dark Aether will be like in the sequel to Cold War Zombies. Will it go to a more primitive form? Will the old ones escape? We will just have to wait and see. A theory circulating at the moment, proposed by Kaljitsu, Eric Maynard, and Marikor, is that the boy who was killed by Weaver, Samuel, was actually Eddie's son, seen along with his wife on the photograph on his desk in the final cutscene. This would make sense because if we actually look at Eddie, the director, he appears to have a scar on his neck. Maybe Weaver thought he killed him, but he actually managed to survive, whilst his wife and son seemingly perished. And this would make a lot of sense because Eddie handpicked Weaver to lead Requiem, and it's clear that he is putting different puzzle pieces in motion. Supporting this is a piece of intel from Piotr in the Dark Aether, where he says that the ethereal orbs are made of memories, and as well as an American spy, likely referring to Peter McCain, and a Russian scientist, likely referring to Anton Gersh. So I'm guessing because in the broken cycle Gorod Krovi never happened, the ethereal orbs of Peter McCain and also Gersh ended up in the Dark Aether, so it is possible that we will probably hear from them again, maybe in Vanguard or Trek's next title. Along with him encountering these two orbs, he also encountered an orb with the memories of a child that were incredibly special, in that it was able to cross between worlds like Piotr himself, and that its memories are incredibly powerful. We know this plus the fact that in Outbreak's second main quest, Operation Excision, the red orb is attracted to the blue bunny, and the fact that the bunny was always Richtofen's childhood toy makes for incredibly interesting implications. We learn that the bunny's name is Mr. Pigs and it belongs to a child. It's described as liking to play hide and seek and keeps the child safe in a dark place. What's more is if you listen to this red orb, you can hear a mixture of laughter and crying of a child. With what we know now about the boy, it is possible that this child is in fact the boy himself, and that in the final moments of the house burning down, he held his toy bunny tight with him, and was somehow teleported into the Dark Aether, becoming an ethereal orb holding his memories, whilst his mother perished. Mr. Peaks has now become his own Dark Aether artifact that we utilized in Operation Excision. So when we are using this artifact, we may be using the powers of Samuel. The bunny is also present in the mystery box, replacing Samantha Maxis's previous teddy bear.
I didn't even get my turn.
And what's even crazier, in the final moments of Primus and Ultimus, when they hung around the campfire getting drunk and telling all sorts of stories, Ultimus Richtofen says to Primus Richtofen, "Sadly no, I am all out of rabbits."
Well, I can honestly say, I never imagined being in this position. I mean, look at us, all bunny. I'm not going to apologize for all the terrible things I have done, because frankly, I'm not sorry for anything. Yeah, I've had the time of my life. No, I know you'll probably never really trust me, and even now, you'll be expecting me to pull some last-minute rabbit out of a hat. A big rabbit of betrayal.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you, Janus. I knew I could rely on you. So, do you have a rabbit of betrayal? If I'm honest, I've been expecting one since we all got together. Sadly, no. I am all out of rabbits.
And the Forsaken actually references this quote.
But all good things must come to an end. As the old Dark Aether saying goes, you're all out of rabbits.
Was them or me?
Do you know what that means? It means no more escapes. This time, no one gets out alive. Bye-bye.
Which is really interesting and again shows that when you are within the Dark Aether you start to gain a lot of knowledge of all of time. But maybe it was Eddie who bought Samuel the bunny, if he is in fact his son. Even the name Samuel could be a reference to Samuel Stullinger, one of the members of Victis, as some of the last words Eddie would have heard in the old multiverse would have been Ultimus Richtofen apologizing to Stullinger.
What are you talking about? We found the Agarvan device!
I know. And I'm so sorry.
The guilt of which may have haunted the young Eddie throughout his new life. That could be a big part of Eddie's goal, trying to save his son. And maybe that is a big purpose of all of this, especially considering the fact that the Dark Aether is capable of cloning and revitalizing. He needs a body to return to, and maybe Eddie could be out for revenge if Sam and Weaver did in fact cause this tragic event. And that could be a big part of him setting all of these things in motion, which makes complete sense because Samantha before said that she feels like the events of that day would come back to haunt them, and they already have. She's in the Dark Aether and Weaver has been arrested. So if Weaver did attempt to assassinate Eddie Richtofen, we have to question why, because Samantha Maxis provided him with the wanted target. So why was he wanted? What was he up to be on the CIA's radar? He must have been up to something dodgy. I wonder if he was even working on Projekt Janus back then, or was he up to some other nefarious agenda? You know what would be a massive play, and this is probably unlikely, that he intended to get his son and wife killed, and that this is all part of some big grand master plan and he's playing chess from a mile away. I highly doubt this though. Trust me, Richtofen usually has the one up, but I don't think he would be that far one up to literally have a family just to kill them to set some sort of weird event in motion. But the thing is, if Eddie was wanted and a target, how on earth did he manage to become the director of Requiem? Surely there would have been an appropriate background check. Unless he's just been doing a lot of fraudulent stuff to make his way through the cracks, I'm not exactly sure. We do know that Eddie is able to speak Russian, which is interesting, as well as English, and his accent appears to be a mixture between German and American. The classic Ultimus and Primus Richtofens we know were German, but in the house, he was American, and we're not exactly sure on his early years and his early life, but he might have lived a lot of his new life in this new rebooted universe from child to adult in America, but then he may have been involved in Iran too. So yeah, everything is quite up in the air right now. But again, this is all heavily speculative. None of this is confirmed. We do not know for sure that Samuel is Eddie's son, but I really do think that all of the pieces are fitting together nicely, and it seems like this is the direction they are going, but I want to stress this is not confirmed. One thing to note, as he said earlier, Eddie does remember the events of the old Aetherverse, at least to some extent. He remembers being trapped inside Monty's house in Agartha, hence the snow globe that Samantha used to play with. Samantha only appears to vaguely remember things, so Eddie has a massive one-up on her, and he was able to use this to his advantage when interrogating her, having known her birth date that only someone from the original timeline would have known. Due to this sheer fact, he likely knows more about the Dark Aether than anyone else on Earth, and it is really unclear as to why he remembers, but Samantha doesn't. Samantha and Eddie were meant to be pure innocent souls, but unfortunately ironically, they both still seem stricken with trauma. The final thing I want to mention pertaining to the sequel to Cold War Zombies, and the most important loose end, is Projekt Janus. In ancient Roman religion and myth, Janus is the god of beginnings, gateways, transitions, time, duality, and endings. The redacted board of directors are the key stakeholders in it, and it requires a stable gateway to the Dark Aether, but besides that, we don't really know much about what it is, and Eddie likely has his own agenda for it, outside of that of this shadowy organization. For example, he may just be using this redacted board as a way to fund his means, and this board has a different intention for Projekt Janus, but Eddie is just using them to extract money for some other goal. What's interesting about the idea of this gateway though is that by the time we reach 1990, 5 years after Forsaken, Sam may have been in the Dark Aether for 50 years, meaning she might end up being an elder god herself. Or maybe she could even end up at the top of the Dark Aether like Zykov once was. And if the old ones do escape, that could be a way for the Dark Aether to still have order restored if she is controlling that, but it's unclear as to how Samantha would react having been in there for so long. She maintains the fact that she is a good person, but that's a lot of time for her to be corrupted. And all the while, Peck, Gorev, Jaeger, and Ravenov are left to try and survive, either working for or running from the director and his master plan. The Forsaken does allude to Samantha killing off all of the crew, but this could just be manipulation. But if she does gain a lot of power whilst in the Dark Aether, she may become fully corrupted like her younger self. And who knows, maybe this was part of Eddie's plan for her to be trapped in the Dark Aether away from whatever he's up to and gain all of these powers. We know that the director after Cold War has closed down a county in West Virginia and begun to hire scientists and workers. What this secret project he is working on is unknown, but we know he needs machinery for digging tunnels, and it is likely related to Projekt Janus. I do wonder if he may be in possession of Dark Aether artifacts, maybe Dr. Peck could be in search of them, or already in possession of some too. Like I said earlier, in Vanguard Zombies, Die Wahrheit search for items that appear only in myths and legends, such as Atlantis. I do wonder whether we may finally see Atlantis, or an alternative underwater map in the sequel to Cold War Zombies. Whilst it is generally believed that Atlantis is situated in the Atlantic Ocean, there are some that believe that this made up place could potentially be in the Pacific Ocean, but this is a video game after all, so they can come up with anything they desire. After all, Peck is heading to where the inversion warheads lay in the Pacific Ocean. This would make for an insanely twisted aquatic map, especially considering it may be a highly weakened point between the world and the Dark Aether. High levels of Aetherium contamination could allow inhabitants to theoretically breathe underwater, and the Dark Aether itself is oceanic in nature, at least the portrayal of it in Cold War Zombies. If this area is of particular dimensional fragility, then this could be a spot where they could breach the Dark Aether. Trek have been trolling us with Atlantis since Zombies even began in World at War, and I hope that the meme can finally become a reality. With Peck heading to the Pacific though, it is interesting how we just so happen to be on a tropical island there in Warzone, and although it's quite far from the location where Peck is heading to, it does make me wonder if they could end up reusing this location for a future Outbreak map in the sequel. I would love to see Outbreak return, and the map is beautiful with a bunch of old runes that could tie into the zombie story, and I think it is close enough to the missile crash site to where Aetherium may have contaminated the area too. So I can't wait to see this all unfold in the next game. Trek have set up a bunch of loose ends that will hopefully tie together nicely in the next game and set up well. Let me know in the comment section down below, where do you think things are heading, and do you think that Peck is working for or against the director? Personally, I think he's working against the director, and hopefully will be a good guy in the next game and will be the key into helping us out. One last thing that I want to touch upon isn't pertaining to the canon itself, but more so a mistake in the last entire story video. In that video, we had received the Die Maschine trailer at the time, where the visible writing, "The accursed one will rise again," could be seen on the staircase in Der Toten. At the time, it seemed pretty obvious to draw parallels to the first one, the original being in creation that later split apart into Dr. Monty and the Shadow Man. We were under the assumption that on Der Toten, they rejoined and were thrown into the Dark Aether, and would be the main threat in Black Ops Cold War Zombies. In later intel in this game, we started learning of this entity known as the One, that seemed to infer that the first one was once more, but as it turns out that this was likely an oversight by Treyarch's writers, and they later started calling this entity what we know now as the Forsaken, so that the community would no longer be confused. As to whether the original One will ever be seen again, it's unlikely, and what's more likely is that the Apothecans and Keepers fractured into new entities across the Dark Aether, and that's why we see some creatures that seem to resemble them, although the Keepers and Apothecans are known more. I apologize for this mistake, but it's understandable how the community and I got confused and conflated the Accursed One with the first one, and I'm glad that Treyarch did decide to change the name. I do question why they decided to call it the One initially though. Surely they should have realized we would have jumped to this conclusion, unless it was intentional to just throw us off the trail of Zykov. With that being said, that was the complete storyline for Black Ops Cold War Zombies with an introduction to Vanguard Zombies. There is some information missing from this video because there is literally 5 hours worth of intel, and an explanation with literally every detail from the game could end up being way over 5 hours long if I were to even include all of the Onslaught stuff. If you really want that though, I may be up for it in the future, but it's hard to know when that would be feasible, with the release of Vanguard constantly throwing new information our way, making things instantly outdated. Maybe at the end of Vanguard's life cycle, I could do an updated story video, including everything we learned from Vanguard, as well as an updated version of the prior Aether story, including events from the campaign. That could end up being literally 8 to 10 plus hours though, so I really don't know if I can manage that.